I sat in the front row of the church, my hands clasped tightly on my lap, my gaze fixed on the shiny wooden coffin placed on the pedestal. Inside was my mother, the woman I had tried to please my entire life. But in the end, she left me with a clear and painful message: I was never good enough. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of helplessness, of a pain that had lingered for decades and I knew would never heal. Next to me, my sister, Lauren, was excelling in her role as the grieving daughter. She cried uncontrollably, her shining eyes hidden behind a white lace handkerchief, creating a perfect scene. Lauren always knew how to turn everything into her own stage. Even at our mother's funeral, she remained the center of attention. The designer black dress hugged her perfect body, her golden hair styled in soft, perfect waves. And me, I sat there in a simple dress, trying to keep calm while all eyes were on her, not me. As the priest read the final prayer, Lauren broke down sobbing, leaning her head on her husband Connor's shoulder, who immediately wrapped his arms around her like a hero. They looked as if they had stepped out of a perfect painting. But I felt nothing at all. Not because I didn't love my mother, but because I was used to feeling forgotten. Since I was young, Emily, have always been the one in the background. Lauren, my sister, is the golden child, the perfect child, the one who always receives all the light and attention. I recalled childhood memories. When Lauren won the ballet competition at 6 years old, my parents threw a big party with a cake shaped like a pair of ballet shoes. But when I won first place in the spelling bee that same year, my mom just patted my head and said, "Well done, Emily. Keep it up." Lauren always received the best of everything. When she turned 16, my parents gifted her a brand new car with a big red bow tied on the roof. As for me, when I turned 16, I got an old bicycle with the explanation, "You don't go out much, Emily." I tried hard not to let it hurt me. I told myself I didn't need their recognition. But deep down, it still hurt. As I watched Lauren sobbing beside me, I wondered, is she truly grieving, or is this just another performance? Lauren has always been the perfect daughter in my parents' eyes. And me? I'm just a faint shadow in the family portrait. I'm not crying because I've lost my mother. I'm crying for the injustice that has lasted my entire life. I'm crying because I know that even in death, my mother chose Lauren. The family members sat in the back row, avoiding my gaze. They knew. They all knew. I had braced myself for what was about to happen. I had told myself that I wouldn't care. But nothing could prepare me to face the words that the lawyer was about to say after the ceremony. Lauren would have it all. And me, I would get nothing. After the ceremony, I sat in the living room of the old house, once the home of my family, but now just a place filled with painful memories. Lauren sat across from me, still maintaining her perfect appearance as always, while I felt like I was breaking into pieces. The lawyer appeared, holding a thick stack of documents. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began to read the will. I had mentally prepared for the worst, but that did not lessen the sharpness of the pain. All the assets, including this house, will be left to Lauren, he said, his voice monotone as if this were just a regular procedure. I sat there, feeling as if someone had punched me straight in the chest. All of it belonged to her? The lawyer continued, as if trying to ease the situation. Your parents believe that Emily is an independent, self-sufficient person who doesn't need financial support. Meanwhile, Lauren is a housewife who needs help to maintain a stable life. I let out a bitter laugh in the silent room. Stable. I repeated, looking directly at Lauren. She lives in a mansion, drives a luxury car, and has a husband who earns millions of dollars a year. And me? I work 12 hours a day just to pay the rent. Lauren said nothing. She just sat there, with a look on her face as if everything made perfect sense. I looked at the lawyer, trying to stay calm, but inside, there was a storm raging. Independent, I repeated, my voice shaking. They think I don't need help, but the truth is, they have never cared about what I need. When the lawyer left, I felt like everything was crumbling around me. I stepped out of the room, searching for a quiet corner to breathe. But the air seemed suffocating, as if the entire world was weighing down on my shoulders. I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photo hanging on the wall. In the picture, Lauren stood in the middle, her radiant smile, while I stood next to her, overshadowed by her presence. Even in memories, I was just a shadow. I wondered, did I deserve to be treated like this? What did I do wrong? I had tried my whole life to prove that I also deserved to be loved, but in the end, all I received was oblivion. Despair engulfed me like a raging wave. I felt like I was sinking, with no one to hold on to, no way out. But I did not cry, not because I did not want to, but because I had long run out of tears. My whole life I had been accustomed to injustice, but this time, I knew I could not remain silent any longer. I turned back to the living room where Lauren was talking on the phone, probably with her husband. She laughed, a comfortable laugh, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, looking at her, and within me surged a fierce determination. I did not know what I would do, but I knew one thing. I would not let this end like this. Lauren may have taken everything, but I would not let her take away my dignity. I left the house, stepping out into the frigid air. The wind blew through, bringing a chilling sensation deep into my bones, but I paid no attention. In my mind, there was only one thought. It was time for me to seek justice for myself. I returned to my small apartment that evening, a feeling of emptiness enveloping my mind. The room was dark and cold, just like my life at this moment. I threw my purse on the chair, my legs feeling powerless, and sank down to the floor. The lawyer's words still echoed in my head. Emily is independent, self-reliant. Independent? I let out a dry laugh, a sound echoing in the quiet room. Is this what they call independence? I had to work hard, sacrificing everything, just to have a life that was barely livable, while Lauren, who was always pampered, received everything. I looked around my apartment. The peeling walls, the old coffee table I had picked up from a thrift shop, and the small single bed. This is all I have. And now they even want to take away my dignity. I leaned back on the floor, gazing up at the ceiling, and old memories flooded back. I remember the first time I asked my mother for help when I had just graduated from college. I tried my best to support myself, but I knew I needed a little assistance to start my career. You don't need to. Rely on anyone, Emily, my mother said, her voice cold. You are strong. You can take care of yourself. I believed her words. I believed that I could overcome everything on my own. But now I realize that strength is not something I chose, but something I was forced to have. Lauren was different. She was always protected, always favored. When she faced difficulties in her marriage, my mother immediately sent money to help her renovate her house, hoping to preserve family happiness. And me? I was just an outsider in my own family. I sat up, wiped my tears dry. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't let them, the ones who abandoned me, continue to control my life. I turned on my computer and began searching for information about wills and inheritance rights. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew something wasn't right. The reason the lawyer gave, that Lauren needed financial support, was completely unreasonable. Lauren didn't need money, but I needed justice. I spent the whole night researching, reading every line of the law, every clause about inheritance rights. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood. the law, someone who could help me uncover the truth. The next day, I arranged to meet an old friend, Rachel, a lawyer whom I had known since college. Rachel is one of the few people who has always believed in me, and I knew she would not hesitate to help if I needed it. We met at a small cafe in downtown. Rachel looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Emily, you look exhausted. What's going on?" she asked. I told Rachel everything, from the will, the unreasonable reasons given by the lawyer, to the feeling of betrayal by my own family. When I finished, Rachel sat in silence for a moment, then nodded. "I can't believe they would do this," she said, her voice full of outrage. "But I think you have a chance. We just need to find proof that this will is problematic or prove that it's unfair." Rachel started asking questions, and I answered each detail one by one. The more I talked, the lighter I felt. For the first time in years, I felt no longer alone. Rachel promised to help me review the will and learn more about my family's assets. But before we said goodbye, she said something that made me think. "Emily, sometimes the issue isn't just about what they left behind, but also the reason why they did it. Are you sure there are no other secrets in your family?" I sat in silence. Secrets? I had never thought of that. But when Rachel spoke, I realized there were so many things in my family that I had never understood. Why did my mother always favor Lauren? Why did they always see me as an outsider? And why did they choose to leave all their assets to Lauren, knowing that I was struggling in life? I left the coffee shop with a strange feeling. Hope. This is not just about money or possessions. This is about the truth. For the first time in my life, I decided that I would no longer remain silent. I will find out the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Lauren may have won this game, but I will not let her win forever. I returned home feeling chaotic. Rachel's question kept echoing in my mind. "Are you sure there are no other secrets in your family?" Secrets? I had lived my whole life in this family, enduring injustice and coldness, but I never thought there was anything hidden. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were many things that didn't add up. Why did my mother always favor Lauren? Why did my parents always keep their distance from me, as if I were a stranger in my own family? And why did they leave all their assets to Lauren, despite the obvious unfairness? I knew I needed answers, and I wouldn't stop until I uncovered the truth. I began by rummaging through old documents that I had kept from the family. In a small box I carried from the old house, I found letters, bills, and some old photographs. One photograph particularly caught my attention. It was a family photo taken when I was about 5 years old. In the photo, Lauren stood next to my mother, holding her hand tightly while I stood further away from them, closer to my father. I remember that my father was always the only one in the family who really cared about me. But he passed away when I was only 10 years old, and since then, everything had gotten worse. As I flipped the back of the photograph, I saw a faint handwritten note. Summer of 1995, starting over. Starting over? What does that mean? I decided to call Rachel to talk about my discovery. When I told her about the inscription on the photo, Rachel was silent for a moment, then said, "Emily, do you think your parents have hidden something bigger? Maybe about your family or about yourself?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "About myself?" Rachel continued. "I think we need to check more records. There might be something in your family's past that you don't know about." The next day, Rachel and I went to the public records office to search for records about my family. We flipped through each document, every old piece of paper, until Rachel paused at a document that left both of us stunned. It was a birth certificate. But the strange thing was, the name on the birth certificate was not Emily Carter, my name. Instead, it read, Emily Bennett. Bennett? I had never heard that name before. Rachel looked at me, her eyes full of suspicion. "Emily, Are you sure you are your parents' biological child? I felt as though the ground beneath my feet had just crumbled. Could it be that I was not their biological child? I can't let this continue to haunt me. I need answers, and I know there's only one person who can tell me the truth. Lauren. I went to her house that evening. Lauren opened the door, her expression surprised to see me. Emily, what are you doing here? She asked, but I didn't let her say more. What do you know about the name Bennett? I asked directly, my voice cold. Lauren stood stunned, her eyes wide open. I could see a flicker of fear in her gaze, but she quickly hid it with a forced smile. Bennett? What are you talking about? She replied, but I knew she was lying. Don't pretend any more, Lauren, I said, stepping closer. I found my birth certificate. My name is not Emily Carter. I am Emily Bennett. You know what that means, right? Lauren was silent, but I could see her hands trembling. You know something? I continued, my voice shaking with anger. And I will find out the truth, whether you speak or not. Lauren didn't respond. She just stood there, looking at me with a worried expression. I walked away, feeling as if I had just touched a secret that the entire family had been trying to hide for years. As I stepped outside, the cold wind blew past me, but this time, I didn't feel afraid. I knew I was getting closer to the truth. Bennett. That name kept echoing in my head. It was the key to everything I was searching for. And I swear, I won't stop until I know it all. I couldn't sleep that night. The name Bennett kept ringing in my head like a haunting whisper. It was not just a name, it was the key to a door I had never known before. Lauren knew something, I was sure of it, but she wouldn't say. And if I wanted to uncover the truth, I had to do it myself. Rachel called me the next morning. Emily, I found more information about the name Bennett, she said. You need to come here right away. I met Rachel at her law office. On the table was a stack of documents she had found. Rachel pointed to one of them, a record of a lawsuit from over 30 years ago. The name Bennett appears in this case, Rachel said. This is an adoption case, and the names of your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, are listed as the adoptive parents. I felt my heart stop. Adopted? Rachel nodded. Emily, according to what I found, you are not the biological child of the Carter family. You were adopted when you were very young. I sat in shock, unable to believe what I had just heard. All those years, feeling like an outsider in the family, turned out not to be just my imagination. Faint images began to flood my mind. I remember asking my mother when I was young, "Why don't I look like Lauren?" She just smiled and said, "You are special in your own way." I never thought much about it, but now everything is starting to make sense. I am not like Lauren. I am not like anyone in the Carter family, and that is because I do not truly belong to them. I knew I needed answers from my mother. I could no longer live in this darkness. I visited her that afternoon. She was sitting in the living room, looking as calm and elegant as ever. But when I walked in, I saw her freeze, as if she knew what I was about to ask. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know the truth. I'm not your biological child, am I?" She was silent, her eyes looking at me as if trying to find a way to evade. But I wouldn't let her escape. "I found my birth certificate," I continued. "My name is Emily Bennett. Please tell me what happened." She sighed, placing her teacup down on the table. "I had hoped you would never find out," she said, her voice trembling. "So that's the truth?" I asked, feeling as if my heart was being squeezed. She nodded. "You were adopted when you were just 6 months old. Your biological parents could not keep you, and they left you at an adoption center. Your father and I decided to take you in, as we could not have more children after Lauren." I slumped down in the chair, feeling dizzy. But I knew there was still something she hadn't said. "What about my biological parents?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "I don't know much. They left very little information. But I know that your biological father is someone involved in a major scandal. That's why they had to give you up." "What scandal?" I asked, but she shook her head. "I don't know the details. But I think that's why they wanted to hide your identity. They didn't want you to be affected by their past." I felt like everything around me was collapsing. I was not just an abandoned child. I was carrying a past that I knew nothing about, a past that could change everything. I left my mother's house with a feeling of emptiness, but at the same time, I also felt a fire ignite within me. I couldn't let the story end here. I needed to know who my biological parents were and why they had to give me up. Lauren may have won the property game, but this was no longer about money. This was about my identity, about the truth that had been taken from me my whole life. I called Rachel as soon as I got home. "Rachel, I need you to help me find more information about my biological parents," I said. Rachel was silent for a moment, then replied, "I'll do my best. But you have to be prepared, Emily. The truth may not be what you expect." I gave a faint smile. "I've lived my whole life in the dark, Rachel. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." I sat by the window, looking out at the city illuminated by lights. Inside me was a fierce determination. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew that I could not stop. Emily Bennett. That name is the key to everything. And I will not rest until I uncover the truth. Rachel has been working tirelessly since I asked her to help find information about my biological parents. 2 days later, she called me with a tense voice. "Emily, I found some things, but you need to prepare yourself." I went to Rachel's office immediately. On her desk was a thick file with notes and photos carefully clipped together. Rachel pointed to an old photo showing a man and a young woman. "Emily, this is your biological parents," she said. "The man in the photo looks familiar, but I can't remember where I have met him." Rachel explains, "Your biological father is Richard Bennett, a famous businessman in the 90s. But he is not just a businessman. He was also the center of a major financial scandal." Rachel flips to another page of the documents, where there is an old newspaper article with the headline, "Richard Bennett, Empire Collapses Due to Corruption." I stare at his photo in the article. Richard Bennett, a name that had been mentioned frequently in the media, but I had never thought he was related to me. "What about my biological mother?" I ask, my voice trembling. Rachel points to the woman in the photo. "Your mother is Margaret Bennett. She was a prominent social activist, but after Richard's scandal, she disappeared from the media spotlight. No one knows where she went." Rachel continued, "Richard Bennett's scandal was not just about corruption. He was also accused of being involved in an international money laundering ring, and there were even rumors about his involvement in a mysterious death." I felt a chill run down my spine. The mysterious death? Rachel nodded. It was a journalist named Daniel Carter who investigated Richard's scandal. He died in a car accident, but many believe it was not an accident. I was stunned. Daniel Carter? The last name sounds like my adoptive family. Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Emily, I think the Carter family adopting you was not a coincidence. They may have been involved in this scandal in some way." I couldn't sit still with this information. I needed answers from Lauren, someone who always seemed to know more than she admitted. I went to her house that evening. Lauren was sitting in the living room, her expression as cold as ever. "Emily, what are you doing here again?" she asked, but I didn't give her a chance to say more. "You know who my biological parents are, right?" I asked bluntly, my voice filled with anger. Lauren paused, but then she smiled faintly. "So you found out. Well, Emily, maybe it's time you knew the truth. She stood up and walked closer to me. Your biological parents are Richard and Margaret Bennett. But do you know why they abandoned you? I fell silent, waiting for the answer. Lauren continued, They didn't abandon you because they didn't love you. They did it to protect you. After the scandal, Richard was prosecuted, and Margaret knew that if you stayed with them, you would never have a normal life. So, they sent you to our family, people who could keep you safe. I looked at Lauren, feeling like everything was starting to become clear. So, the Carter family adopted you to keep you away from your birth parents' past? Lauren nodded. That's right. But it's not just that. Our father, Daniel Carter, was the one who investigated the scandal involving Richard. He felt responsible for you after he found out the truth. That's why he adopted you. I felt like I had just been caught in a storm. So, was Dad's accident caused by Richard Bennett? Lauren shook her head. No one knows for sure, but many people believe Richard did it. And that's why our mother has always been cold towards you. She has never forgiven the Bennett family for what happened to Dad. I left Lauren's house with a feeling of emptiness. Everything I ever knew about myself had now been turned upside down. I was not just Emily Carter. I was Emily Bennett, the daughter of a man deemed a criminal and a woman who had disappeared from the world. But I knew I couldn't stop here. I needed to find Margaret Bennett, the only person who could tell me the ultimate truth. Rachel agreed to help me once again. We'll find her, Emily, but you have to be prepared. She may not want to be found. I nodded. I don't care. This is my life, and I need to know the truth. I sat at the desk, staring at the picture of Richard and Margaret Bennett. Inside me was a tangled mess of emotions, anger, pain, but also a hint of hope. I didn't know what I would find when facing Margaret, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Emily Bennett. That name was no longer a mystery. It was a part of me, and I would not let my past be buried one more time. Rachel finally found a clue about Margaret Bennett. She is living in seclusion in a small town in the north, far away from the city lights. Emily, I found her address, Rachel said over the phone. But you have to be careful. She might not want to be disturbed. I didn't hesitate. I booked a train ticket immediately and set off the next morning. Margaret's house is deep in a peaceful forest, surrounded by tall, ancient trees. When I knocked on the door, my heart raced. The door opened, and an elderly woman with white hair looked at me. Her eyes, though aged, still shone with intelligence and sharpness. You are Emily, aren't you? She asked, as if she had been waiting for me for a long time. I nodded, speechless. Come in, she said, her voice gentle but full of strength. We sat in the small living room where a warm fire was crackling. Margaret looked at me for a long time before she began to speak. I knew there would come a day you would find your way here, she said. I just didn't think it would come so soon. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Your father, Richard, was not a perfect man, she said, but he loved you more than anything in this world. When the scandal broke, he knew he couldn't protect you. That is why we decided to let you go. What about my mother? Why did she disappear? I asked, my voice choked. Margaret sighed. I had no other choice, Emily. After your father was convicted, I was followed and threatened by those who wanted to destroy our family. I had to disappear to keep myself and you safe. Margaret continued to tell about the years she lived in the shadows, always watching me from afar. She knew that I was adopted by the Carter family and tried to believe that I would have a better life. I had hoped that you would never have to know about this past, she said. But I also know that the truth always finds a way to come to light. I looked at her, feeling both angry and pitiful. Does Mom know that my adoptive father, Daniel Carter, died while investigating my father's scandal? Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I know, and that is the thing that pains me the most. I never wanted anyone to suffer because of my family. We talked until late at night. Margaret told me about my father, an ambitious man but also full of mistakes. She spoke of his love for me and the hopes he placed for my future. When I left the next morning, I no longer felt anger or blame. Instead, I felt relieved. I had found the truth, and I understood that the past does not define who I am. A month later, I returned to the city. I met Lauren again, for the first time without feeling hostility. You knew everything from the beginning, didn't you? I asked. Lauren nodded. I knew, but I didn't know how to tell you. I just wanted to protect you. I smiled. I don't need to be protected anymore. I have found the truth, and I am okay. I decided not to go back to the name Emily Bennett. Although it is a part of me, I am still Emily Carter, someone who has overcome everything to find myself. I started a new job, a new life, and for the first time in my life, I feel free. My past is no longer a burden. It is a part of me, but it does not define me. Emily Carter, that is me, and I am proud of who I am.